Welcome. You've made it. Maybe the world feels heavy tonight. Maybe your mind's searching for meaning in a time that feels uncertain. But now you're here at Myth Night, a quiet place where ancient stories still breathe. Tonight's story isn't just a myth, it's a quiet reflection on a continent once so powerful, now slowly fading. And maybe the fall of Europe was written long before it began. So let's sit together. I'll tell you some very old stories. And if you drift off before they end, that's okay. Some mornings were meant to echo in dreams. And if you enjoy nights like this, feel free to support the channel with a free subscription. It helps this quiet space grow. In a palace that once echoed with laughter, King Midas sits alone at a table of gold. The chair beneath him is gold. The plate before him is gold. The cup that will never again touch his lips, gold. This is where our journey begins tonight, not with the moment of his wish, but with the moment after. The moment when magic becomes curse, when blessing reveals itself as the slowest, most beautiful form of dying. Midas had been a king who loved music, who delighted in the sound of children playing in his gardens. He would wake each morning to the song of birds, to the whisper of wind through olive trees, to the gentle splash of fountains in his courtyards. His hands, then, were warm hands, hands that could touch a shoulder in comfort, hands that could feel the softness of silk, the coolness of marble, the tender skin of those he loved. But on this particular evening, as shadows lengthen across his golden palace, those hands rest motionless on his golden table. He stares at them, these instruments of his transformation, and remembers the god Dionysus appearing in his courtyard just 7 days ago. "You have been kind to my companion," the god had said, his voice carrying the weight of wine and wild places. "Ask for anything, and it shall be yours." Midas had thought himself clever. "Let everything I touch turn to gold," he had said, and the words had left his mouth like birds taking flight, impossible to call back. The god had smiled, not with joy, but with something sadder, something that looked almost like pity. "As you wish," Dionysus had whispered, and vanished like morning mist. Now, 7 days later, Midas understands what the god had seen in that moment. The palace is silent as a tomb. No servants remain. They learned quickly to keep their distance after the first unfortunate contact. No music plays. Instruments become mute metal at his touch. No fires burn in the hearths. Even flame becomes cold gold when he reaches for it. The transformation had begun small, almost playful. A flower in his garden turned to golden sculpture with a casual brush of his fingers. Beautiful, he had thought. Permanent, no more withering, no more decay. But flowers that cannot die also cannot live. They cannot release their perfume into the evening air, cannot dance in the breeze, cannot attract the bees that make the gardens sing with life. He had walked from his gardens to his treasury, touching coins and jewels and precious things, watching them transform into even more precious gold. For a few hours, he had felt like a god himself, the richest man who had ever lived, able to create wealth from nothing more than desire. But wealth, he now knows, is not the same as richness. Wealth is what you own. Richness is what you can enjoy. And Midas, the wealthiest man in all the world, is the poorest soul alive. The bread he tried to eat this morning, gold, hard and cold against his teeth. The wine he attempted to drink, golden liquid that tasted of nothing, that brought no warmth, no comfort, no forgetfulness. Even water, life-giving water, becomes precious metal in his mouth, leaving him forever thirsty in the midst of infinite treasure. But it was not the hunger or thirst that broke him. It was the moment his daughter ran to greet him, arms outstretched, face bright with love. She had been away visiting relatives, had returned home eager to share stories of her journey. She saw her father standing in the courtyard and ran to him as she had 1,000 times before. Father, she had called, and Midas had turned, forgetting in that moment of pure joy what his hands had become. She embraced him, and in the space of a heartbeat, her warm laughter became eternal silence. Her dancing eyes became golden orbs that could never again see sunrises or smile at butterflies or weep at beauty. She stands now in the courtyard where he left her, a perfect golden statue, her arms forever frozen in the gesture of love that became her prison. Birds perch on her shoulders sometimes, not understanding why this strange tree bears no fruit, why this golden girl never moves to shoo them away. Midas visits her each evening, speaks to her as if she might answer. He tells her about his day, about the weight of solitude, about the way silence has become the only sound in his world. He touches her face with hands that can no longer feel, and wonders if somewhere inside that golden shell, some part of her still lives, still loves, still forgives. The irony is not lost on him. He who loved music lives now in perfect silence. He who delighted in taste can no longer eat. He who found joy in human connection has become unable to touch another living thing without destroying it. The gift he thought would free him from want has enslaved him to it. In the deepest part of night, when even the golden palace seems to dim, Midas sometimes wonders if this is what death is like. Not the dramatic ending that poets sing about, but this, the gradual replacement of everything living with something beautiful, permanent, and completely without warmth. He sits at his golden table, in his golden chair, in his golden palace, surrounded by golden silence, and he thinks, what if wealth is a slow kind of death? The question hangs in the air like incense, like prayer, like warning. Outside his palace walls, the world continues its ancient dance of growth and decay, of touching and being touched, of loving and losing and loving again. But inside these golden walls, everything has stopped. Time moves differently here, where nothing can change because everything has already been perfected. Midas has achieved the dream of alchemists and kings. He has turned the world to gold. But dreams, when they come true, exactly as we imagine them, sometimes reveal themselves to be nightmares, wearing masks of beauty. The wind blows through his gardens, but makes no sound among the golden leaves. The fountains stand silent, their water frozen into streams of precious metal. Even the dust motes in the air seem to hang motionless, as if afraid to settle on surfaces that might transform them into something they were never meant to be. And in this golden silence, a truth whispers itself into being, that perhaps the most dangerous prayers are the ones that are answered exactly as we spoke them. Beyond the pillars of Hercules, where the known world ends and mystery begins, there once rose from the sea an island that dreamed it was eternal. Atlantis, they called it, a name that still carries the salt spray of distant waves, the echo of bells ringing beneath fathoms of dark water. Tonight, let us descend to where it waits, 9,000 years beneath the surface, and listen to the story it tells in currents and tides. Picture, if you will, the harbor at dawn, not as it became, a ruin of broken marble and scattered gold, but as it was in its days of glory. Ships from every corner of the earth dock at piers carved from single blocks of stone. The morning light catches in the spray of fountains that never run dry, illuminates gardens where flowers bloom in colors that exist nowhere else in nature. The Atlanteans wake in their city of circles, their home built like a god's dream of perfection. 3 rings of water, 3 rings of land, each one more beautiful than the last. At the center stands the temple of Poseidon, its walls covered in silver, its roof gleaming with gold. The great trident rises from its peak, pointing always toward the sky, as if to remind the heavens themselves who rules the seas. But this morning, this last morning, though no one knows it yet, something is different. The air tastes of copper and ozone. The dolphins that usually play in the harbor swim in tight, nervous circles. Even the birds seem reluctant to land, circling overhead in patterns that look almost like warnings written in wing and flight. In the council chambers, the philosopher kings of Atlantis gather for what they believe is routine business: the management of trade routes, the distribution of wealth from their latest conquests, the expansion of their influence into lands that have never known their power. They sit in chairs carved from a single tree, older than memory, around a table inlaid with maps of the world, not just the world as it is, but the world as they plan it to be. Red markers show the lands they control. Blue marks indicate territories they will soon add to their empire. The entire known world is covered in their colors, and still it is not enough. The Egyptian pharaoh has refused our terms, reports one admiral, his voice carrying the casual tone of a man accustomed to having his way. Perhaps it is time to remind him of the consequences of opposing Atlantis. The tribes of the northern forests have also grown independent, adds another voice. They seem to have forgotten who brought them the gifts of civilization. At the head of the table sits Atlas, great-grandson of the god Poseidon, current ruler of the greatest civilization the world has ever known. His eyes, once bright with wisdom, have grown cold with the weight of certainty. He looks at the map spread before him, at all the lands that bear his mark, and sees only territories yet to be claimed. We have been generous long enough, he says, and his words fall into the chamber like stones dropped into still water. The world has forgotten that order must be imposed, not requested, that peace comes through strength, not negotiation. The other kings nod their agreement. They have heard these words before, have spoken them themselves. It has become their litany, their prayer, their justification for actions that would have appalled their ancestors. But ancestors, they have learned, were naive. The world is not a place for the gentle-hearted. Outside the council chambers, the city continues its daily rhythm, unaware that its fate is being decided in words spoken with calm authority. Merchants hawk their wares in markets that span entire plazas. Artists carve statues from stones that seem to glow with inner light. Engineers work on improvements to the great harbor, planning expansions that will accommodate even more ships, even greater wealth. Children play in parks where the grass never needs water, where the trees bear fruit in every season. Their laughter rises like music toward the sky, mixing with the sound of fountains and the distant crash of waves against the great sea wall that protects their perfect city from the moods of the ocean. But beneath their feet, deep in the earth that supports their island paradise, something stirs. Not with malice, not with anger, but with the slow, inexorable movement of consequences coming due. The sea floor shifts just slightly. Pressure builds along fault lines that have been dormant for millennia. The gods, perhaps, are remembering old debts, old promises, old warnings that went unheeded. Atlas stands from his chair, moves to the great window that looks out over his domain. From here, he can see the three rings of his city, the ships in his harbor, the fertile fields that stretch toward the horizon. All of it his, all of it perfect, all of it exactly as he planned it to be. But in the distance, where sky meets sea, something catches his eye. A darkness on the horizon, too large to be a storm cloud, too still to be a fleet of ships. It sits on the edge of the world, like a thought half remembered, like a word on the tip of the tongue, like a judgment waiting to be spoken. He blinks, and it is gone. Perhaps it was never there at all. Perhaps it was only the shadow of a passing cloud, or the trick of light on water, or the momentary fatigue of eyes that have looked too long at maps and plans and dreams of empire. But deep beneath the city, the tremor comes again, stronger this time. In the great temple, the priests pause in their chanting, feeling something they cannot name, a shift in the air, a change in the rhythm of the tides, a sense that the sea itself is drawing breaths. One of them, older than the rest, raises his head and listens. The earth speaks, he whispers to his companions. Can you hear it? But his fellow priests shake their heads. They hear only the familiar sounds of their perfect city, commerce and laughter, music and the splash of fountains. They have grown deaf to the language of warning, blind to the signs that wise men once read in the flight of birds and the patterns of waves. The old priest returns to his prayers, but now they are different prayers. Not requests for continued prosperity, not gratitude for their blessed abundance, but something older, more urgent. Pleas for forgiveness from gods who have been patient for too long, who have watched their children grow proud and deaf and dangerous. High above, Atlas returns to his seat at the council table. The discussion has moved on to military preparations, to the logistics of teaching the world that Atlantis will not be denied. Ships to be built, armies to be recruited, technologies of war to be deployed against those who persist in believing they can stand against the tide of inevitable progress. By next season, Atlas declares, every nation will understand their place in the new order. Those who submit will be rewarded. Those who resist will be reminded why the gods made us their inheritors. The words echo in the chamber, bounce off walls built to amplify the voices of power. And perhaps, in that echo, there is something else. A hollow sound, like wind through empty halls, like waves rushing into spaces where dry land used to be. But no one hears it. They are too busy planning the future, too certain of their strength, too proud to imagine that power built on conquest might itself be conquered. They discuss details late into the evening, mapping out campaigns that will never be fought, drawing borders for territories they will never rule. And beneath their feet, the earth listens and remembers and prepares to answer. The story ends not with fire and violence, but with water rising slowly, inevitably, like patience finally exhausted. Cities that dream they are eternal sometimes discover that eternity has other plans. But that is a tale for another time, another depth. For now, let the image linger. A perfect city, perfectly certain of its perfection, perfectly blind to the sea rising around its walls. Abundance that becomes so complete, it forgets how to bend, how to yield, how to listen to voices that speak of limits and balance, and the danger of believing you are the only story the world needs to hear. Listen, can you hear it? The sound of bells ringing beneath the waves, marking hours in a city that forgot that time, like water, eventually covers everything. In the valley of Shinar, where rivers converge and the earth is black with fertility, the children of Noah gathered and made a discovery that changed everything. Not gold, not wisdom, not some secret of the gods, but brick. Before brick, their ancestors had built with stone, each block unique, each wall a negotiation between the builder and the natural shape of rock. But brick was different. Brick was uniform, predictable, infinite. Brick could be made by anyone, anywhere, in any quantity needed. Brick was the first mass production, the first standardization, the first technology that promised to make the impossible mundane. Come, they said to one another in the language they all shared then, the one tongue that held within it every word that had ever needed speaking. Let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly. The words were simple, but they carried the weight of revolution. For the first time in human history, a people looked at the earth beneath their feet and saw not limitation, but raw material. They looked at the sky above their heads and saw not the untouchable realm of gods, but territory to be claimed. Picture them in those early days, these children of the flood, these inheritors of a world washed clean. They work side by side in the brick fields, their hands black with clay, their faces bright with shared purpose. The work is hard but satisfying. Each brick is exactly like its neighbors, yet each one brings them closer to their dream. And what a dream it was! Not merely a city, but the city, a place so magnificent that all the scattered tribes of earth would see it from afar and know they had found their home. A tower so tall it would touch the very throne of heaven, proving once and for all that human will, properly organized, could accomplish anything. We shall make a name for ourselves, they declare in their councils, and the phrase rings with pride and ambition. No more wandering from valley to valley, following herds and hoping for rain. No more living at the mercy of seasons and storms and the unpredictable moods of nature. They will build themselves a monument to human capability, a testament to what unity and determination can achieve. The work begins with ceremony. The first brick is laid by the eldest among them, a man who remembers stories of the flood, who carries in his memory the weight of worlds ending and beginning. Let this be the foundation, he says, of something that will endure. And they build, day after day, season after season, year after year. The tower rises from the plain like a mountain being born in reverse, reaching not down into the earth, but up toward the stars. From a distance, travelers see it shimmering in the heat of the day, glowing in the light of evening, standing like a pillar of fire against the darkness of night. But it is not just the tower that grows, The city spreads around its base like rings on water, each circle larger and more complex than the last. Streets are laid out in perfect grids. Markets are organized by trade and specialty. Houses rise in ordered rows, each one built to the same specifications, each one housing families who share the same dream of upward progress. The language, too, begins to change, not all at once, not dramatically, but in small ways that seem natural, necessary, even beneficial. The bricklayers develop their own words for different types of clay, for the precise heat needed in firing, for the exact angle required in laying. The engineers create terminology for stress and load, for foundation and structure, for all the technical challenges that arise when you attempt to build beyond what has ever been built before. The merchants, trading with distant peoples to acquire materials not found in Shinar, begin to adopt foreign words for foreign goods. The administrators, managing the complex logistics of the great project, invent new terms for organization and hierarchy, for the distribution of labor and resources across an undertaking of unprecedented scale. At first, these specialized vocabularies seem like signs of success. The project has become so sophisticated that it requires sophisticated language to describe it. They are developing expertise, creating knowledge, pushing the boundaries of what humans can accomplish when they work together toward a common goal. But slowly, subtly, the specialists begin to find it difficult to communicate with those outside their particular area of expertise. The bricklayers, deep in their craft, speak in terms that the engineers find imprecise. The engineers, focused on their calculations, use language that the administrators find abstract and unhelpful. The administrators, concerned with the broader vision, express themselves in ways that the workers find disconnected from daily reality. Still, the tower rises. Now it is so tall that clouds sometimes gather around its upper levels. Birds nest in its crevices, like buildings within buildings. The people who work on the highest levels require special equipment to breathe in the thin air, special clothing to protect them from the cold that exists so far above the earth. From the top, on clear days, you can see the curvature of the world itself. The earth spreads out below like a map, rivers appearing as silver threads, forests as green patches, other cities as small smudges of smoke and shadow. It is a view that no human eye has ever seen before, a perspective that makes the viewer feel almost godlike in their elevation above ordinary concerns. But something strange begins to happen to those who work at these heights. They speak differently when they return to ground level, if they return at all. Many choose to remain in the upper reaches, forming communities of cloud dwellers who seem to have less and less in common with those who keep their feet on solid earth. The divisions multiply. The tower top people develop their own customs, their own priorities, their own way of understanding what the great project is supposed to accomplish. The middle-level workers focus on their particular section, their specific contribution, losing sight of the overall vision in the complexity of daily tasks. The ground-level people begin to question whether the tower, now so tall it disappears into mist and distance, still serves any purpose they can understand. The common language fractures like a broken mirror, each piece reflecting a different aspect of what was once a shared vision. Conversations become difficult, then strained, then impossible. Meetings end in confusion. Instructions, are misunderstood. The smooth coordination that once made the project a marvel of human cooperation begins to break down. Arguments arise over priorities, over methods, over the fundamental question of what they are trying to achieve. The tower top people insist that height is everything, that the goal is to reach heaven, to establish direct communication with the divine, to prove that humanity can transcend its earthly limitations. The middle level workers argue that stability is paramount, that building safely and solidly is more important than reaching any particular altitude. The ground level people begin to suggest that perhaps the tower is already tall enough, that maybe it's time to focus on other needs, other projects, other dreams. But they can no longer explain these disagreements to each other. The words they use mean different things to different groups. The priorities they express are filtered through specialized vocabularies that have grown incompatible with one another. They are no longer having conversations, but delivering monologues in languages that sound familiar, but carry meanings that no longer align. Work slows, then stops. Not because of any external enemy, not because of natural disaster or divine intervention, but because the builders can no longer understand what they are building together. Each group continues its own work according to its own understanding, but the coordination that made the tower possible has dissolved into confusion and cross purposes. One morning, they wake to find that they are no longer one people, but many peoples. They look at each other across the work sites and see strangers. They speak words that sound almost familiar, but convey meanings that make no sense. They share memories of common purpose, but can no longer agree on what that purpose was or how it should be pursued. The great project, the unified dream, the monument to human capability, stands incomplete against the sky. Not destroyed, not torn down, but abandoned, left to the wind and weather and the slow work of time, while its builders scatter across the earth, each group carrying fragments of the original language, pieces of the original dream. From a distance, the tower still looks impressive. Travelers still stop to marvel at its height, its ambition, its testament to what humans can accomplish when they work together. But up close, in the silence of its empty levels and unfinished rooms, it tells a different story. It whispers of unity that became division, of shared language that became mutual incomprehension, of common cause that dissolved into competing agendas. It stands as a monument not to human achievement, but to human limitation, the strange capacity to lose sight of each other even while building toward the same sky. The wind blows through its upper reaches, carrying echoes of voices that once spoke as one but learned too late that speaking the same words is not the same as sharing the same meaning. That building together requires more than common materials and shared labor. That perhaps the greatest heights require not just upward ambition, but downward roots, not just reaching toward heaven, but remaining grounded in the simple understanding that we are all, in the end, children of the same small earth. Deep beneath the Rhine, where sunlight has never touched the riverbed and currents carry whispers older than human memory, there gleamed a treasure that should have remained hidden forever. The Rhine gold, they called it, metal that held within its veins not just wealth, but the power to command wealth, to reshape the world according to the desires of whoever possessed it. The river daughters, the Rhine maidens, had guarded it since the world was young. They swam around it in their endless dance, their voices weaving songs that kept the gold content to shimmer in the depths, beautiful and harmless and purely decorative. As long as love existed in the world, the gold would remain what it was meant to be, a thing of beauty rather than power, wonder rather than want. But love, like all precious things, is fragile. And on a morning when mist rose from the river like ghostly fingers, Alberic the dwarf came to the water's edge and changed everything. He had been watching the maidens from the shadows of the riverbank, his heart heavy with loneliness, his eyes bright with longing. They were beautiful beyond anything he had ever imagined, creatures of grace and laughter and effortless joy. For hours he listened to their songs, watched their dance, and felt something in his chest that he had no name for. "Come swim with us," they called when they noticed him lurking in the reeds. But their invitation was playful rather than sincere, teasing rather than welcoming. They were creatures of the water, and he was a being of earth and darkness, shaped by hammers and forge fire rather than currents and song. "Come dance with us," they sang, and swirled just beyond his reach when he waded into the shallows. "Come play with us," they laughed, and darted away like fish when he stretched out his hands toward their brightness. The game continued until it was no longer a game, until Alberic realized that their laughter held mockery, their invitations were meant to highlight his exclusion rather than offer inclusion. He was entertainment to them, not a potential companion, a curiosity, not a being capable of inspiring love. In that moment, standing waist deep in the cold water of the Rhine, Alberic felt something die inside his chest. Not dramatically, not with pain, but with the quiet certainty of a candle being snuffed out. Love, he understood, was not for creatures like him. Love was for the beautiful, the graceful, the beings who moved through the world like music made flesh. But he had learned something else in that moment of rejection. The Rhine maidens had spoken carelessly of their treasure, had mentioned in their teasing songs the power that lay sleeping in the golden veins beneath the river, power that could only be claimed by one who renounced love forever, who chose dominion over desire, control over connection. "Then I choose power," Alberic whispered, and the words fell from his lips like stones dropped into deep water. The Rhine maidens stopped their dancing, their laughter dying as they realized what was about to happen. But it was too late for warnings, too late for bargains, too late for anything but consequence. Alberic reached down into the riverbed and seized the gold with hands that would never again touch another being with tenderness. The metal flowed like liquid fire up his arms, into his heart, through his consciousness. In an instant, he understood what he had gained and what he had lost. All the power in the world, purchased with the capacity to love or be loved. The Rhine maidens wept as he emerged from their river. The treasure melted and reformed into a ring that circled his finger like a golden chain. They sang their laments to the empty water, mourning not just the loss of their treasure, but the birth of something new and terrible in the world: power without love, dominion without connection, strength without wisdom. Alberic descended into the depths of the earth, into caverns where the Nibelung people had labored for generations as smiths and miners. But now their labor had a new purpose. With the power of the ring, He commanded them to forge weapons and armor, to mine gold and precious stones, to create an army and arsenal that would make him master of all the realms above and below the earth. The work never stopped. Day and night, the hammers rang in the underground workshops. The forges burned with fires that never dimmed. The Nibelung people, once proud craftsmen who took joy in their skill, became slaves to production quotas and strategic objectives. Their songs of labor became rhythms of exhaustion. Their pride in craftsmanship became fear of punishment for insufficient output. But power, like gold, attracts those who crave it. Word of Alberic's treasure spread through the upper world like wildfire through dry grass. Kings and warriors, gods and heroes all began to dream of possessing the ring that could command infinite wealth, that could reshape reality according to the will of its owner. The giants Fafnir and Fasolt heard the whispers and decided they must have the treasure for themselves. They were not motivated by love of gold or lust for power, but by something simpler and perhaps more dangerous, the belief that they deserved what others possessed, that strength should be rewarded with wealth, that the powerful should take what they could from the weak. The gods themselves were not immune to the treasure's call. Wotan, king of Asgard, saw in the ring a solution to problems that wisdom alone could not solve. Debts that needed paying, enemies that required defeating, a cosmic order that needed enforcing. With the ring's power, he could establish peace by making resistance impossible, create justice by eliminating the ability to commit injustice. But the curse of the treasure was not just in its possession, but in its pursuit. Each being who desired it found themselves changed by that desire, shaped by the strategies required to claim it, corrupted by the compromises necessary to keep it. Brothers turned against brothers, allies became enemies, love transformed into calculation. Siegfried the hero, pure of heart and innocent of greed, became entangled in the web of schemes surrounding the treasure, not because he wanted the gold, but because he loved truly and completely, and love in a world shaped by the ring's power becomes a liability, a weakness to be exploited by those who have renounced such softness. Brunhilde the Valkyrie, wise in the ways of gods and fate, found her wisdom useless against the ring's influence. She who could see the threads of destiny stretching into the future was blinded by the immediate needs of protection and revenge. She who had served as messenger between the divine and mortal realms became trapped in the very conflicts she had once observed from above. The curse spread like poison in still water, not dramatically, not obviously, but with the quiet inevitability of cause and effect. Each act of betrayal made the next betrayal easier. Each compromise of principle made the next compromise seem reasonable. Each choice of power over love made love seem more naive, more dispensable, more obviously foolish. In the end, the treasure consumed everyone who touched it, not through violence, but through the gradual erosion of everything that made existence meaningful. The ring promised power, but delivered isolation. It offered control, but provided only the ability to control a world drained of everything worth controlling. The gods themselves were not exempt from the curse. Wotan, who sought to use the ring's power to establish divine order, found that order built on stolen power contained the seeds of its own destruction. The very authority he thought to strengthen was undermined by the methods he used to strengthen it. Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, began not with external enemies or cosmic disasters, but with the slow poison of power pursued for its own sake, of strength untempered by wisdom, of dominion sought without thought for what would remain when dominion was achieved. The Rhine flows on, its waters carrying the echoes of what was lost when love was traded for power, when connection was sacrificed for control. The treasure sleeps again in the depths, waiting for the next being who believes they can possess it without being possessed by it, who thinks they can wield its power without paying its price. And that price never changes, everything that makes power worth having in the first place. Love, loyalty, trust, joy, the simple pleasure of existing in relationship with others rather than dominion over them. The treasure offers infinite gold in exchange for finite humanity, ultimate power in return for the ultimate poverty, a heart that can no longer feel what it has lost. There was a day, no one recorded exactly when, no chronicles mark the date, when the last prayer to Jupiter fell silent in Rome, not because the temple was destroyed, not because the priests were forbidden to speak, but because no one thought to offer the words anymore. The God who had ruled the heavens, who had guided the destiny of the greatest empire the world had ever known, simply faded from relevance. Picture that moment if you can. The temple still stands, its columns still gleaming white in the afternoon sun. The altar still bears traces of yesterday's offerings, flowers that will wilt unobserved, wine that will evaporate into air that no divine presence breathes. The sacred fire still burns, tended by priests who perform their duties with the mechanical precision of those who serve out of habit rather than conviction. But the prayers, when they come at all, sound different now, hollow, like words spoken in an empty room, like songs sung to an audience that has quietly left during the performance. The gods, it seems, have better places to be. This is how faiths die, not in fire and martyrdom, not in grand gestures of rejection or dramatic declarations of independence from the divine. They die in the quiet spaces between prayers, in the growing pauses between offerings, in the slow shift from reverence to routine, to reluctant obligation, to simple forgetfulness. In Greece, the last oracle at Delphi delivers her final prophecy to an empty chamber. The sacred vapors still rise from the earth. The ancient ritual still unfolds according to traditions older than written history, but the pilgrims have stopped coming. The questions that once drove kings and commoners to seek divine guidance, questions of war and love, harvest and destiny, meaning and purpose, are now answered by philosophers and politicians, by merchants and generals, by anyone except the gods who once whispered truth through mortal lips. Apollo, god of light and prophecy, finds his voice growing faint, not because his power has diminished, but because there are fewer ears willing to hear what he has to say. The world has grown too complex for simple divine guidance, too sophisticated for the straightforward ethics of Olympian morality. The gods who once seemed infinite in their wisdom now appear naive, outdated, inadequate to the challenges of an empire that spans continents and encompasses cultures they never imagined. In Egypt, the great temple of Ra stands silent at dawn for the first time in 3 millennia. The sun still rises, still travels its ancient path across the sky, but no priests gather to sing it into being. The complex rituals that once guaranteed the world's continuation, the daily defeat of the chaos serpent, the nightly journey through the underworld, the eternal cycle of death and resurrection, are no longer performed with the precision that kept cosmic order intact. The Pharaoh still rules, but he rules as a man rather than as a god incarnate. The divine authority that once flowed through his words, that made his decisions expressions of cosmic will rather than personal preference, has evaporated like morning mist. He is just another ruler now, powerful but mortal, commanding but not sacred. The process is so gradual that it's almost imperceptible. Generation by generation, the gods become more distant, more abstract, more irrelevant to daily concerns. Children grow up hearing their names in stories rather than prayers. Adults invoke them as metaphors rather than seeking their intervention. The elderly remember when divine presence felt real, immediate, necessary, but find themselves unable to transmit that sense of reality to younger generations who have learned to navigate the world without supernatural guidance. In the forests of Germany, the sacred groves where druids once communed with spirits of oak and ash stand empty. The trees still whisper in the wind, still hold whatever wisdom ancient bark and deep roots contain, but there are no longer priests trained to interpret their messages. The old knowledge, how to read the flight of birds, how to understand the language of storms, how to recognize divine will in the patterns of leaf and stone, dies with the last generation that believed such knowledge was essential for survival. The Roman legions march under eagles rather than gods. Their victories are attributed to discipline and training rather than divine favor. Their defeats are explained by tactical errors rather than divine displeasure. The complex relationship between mortal action and cosmic consequence, which once made every battle a theological as well as political event, reduces to simple cause and effect, strategy and execution, success and failure measured in purely material terms. But perhaps the most profound change is not in the temples or the rituals or the public expressions of faith. It is in the quiet moments when individuals used to turn to the gods for comfort, guidance, meaning. The mother who once prayed to Juno for her children's safety now simply worries. The farmer who once offered first fruits to Ceres for the harvest's success now only calculates weather patterns and soil conditions. The merchant who once sought Mercury's blessing for safe travels now relies solely on guards and favorable trade winds. The world becomes, in a sense, smaller, more predictable, more completely under human control. The mysterious forces that once shaped destiny from beyond the veil of visible reality give way to forces that can be understood, manipulated, while managed. Magic becomes technology. Prayer becomes planning. Divine will becomes human determination. Yet something is lost in this transition, something that cannot be measured or quantified or replaced. The sense that existence has meaning beyond what mortals assign to it. The feeling that individual actions resonate in cosmic harmonies larger than personal consequence. The comfort of knowing that consciousness is not alone in the universe, that intelligence and purpose extend beyond the boundaries of human understanding. In the growing silence of abandoned temples, in the darkening of altars where fires once burned eternally, in the emptiness of sacred spaces where prayers once rose like incense, there is a profound loneliness. Not the dramatic anguish of losing something precious, but the quiet ache of realizing that something you didn't know you needed is no longer there. The gods do not die with anger or sorrow. They fade with the dignity of teachers whose students have decided they no longer need instruction, of parents whose children have grown too sophisticated for bedtime stories, of friends whose company is no longer sought because their conversation has become irrelevant to modern concerns. They withdraw to wherever unused deities go when mortals stop believing in them. Not to non existence, gods are too fundamentally real for that, but to a kind of cosmic retirement, a realm where they wait with infinite patience for the possibility that their children might someday remember they have need of more than bread and circuses, more than comfort and safety, more than the material satisfactions of a world successfully tamed. And in that waiting, there is both sadness and hope. Sadness for the connection that has been severed, the dialogue that has been reduced to monologue, the relationship that has withered into mere memory. But hope, too, that the silence is not permanent, that the hunger for meaning which drove mortals to seek gods in the first place might someday reassert itself. For now, though, the temples stand empty, the altars grow cold, the prayers fade to whispers, then to silence. And somewhere in that silence, the gods wait, patient as stone, eternal as starlight, ready to resume the conversation whenever their children remember how to speak the ancient words that bridge the space between mortal and divine. The absence echoes through the world like the sound of a great bell that has stopped ringing, not destroyed, not broken, but simply no longer struck by human hands that have forgotten why its voice once mattered. The Via Appia stretches into twilight, its ancient stones worn smooth by millions of footsteps that will never fall again. Along its edges, wild grass pushes through gaps in the paving, and somewhere in the distance, a single cow bells softly as it grazes among ruins that once housed senators and merchants, philosophers and slaves. This is not the Rome of popular imagination, the Rome of burning and barbarian hordes, of dramatic conquest and violent collapse. This is the other Rome, the quieter death, the empire that did not fall so much as it simply stopped, like a great engine that ran for centuries before its fuel was exhausted, before its operators forgot how to maintain it, before its purpose became unclear to those who inherited its magnificent complexity. Picture Marcus Aurelius Flavius, a minor administrator in the year 476 AD, walking these same stones on what he does not know is the last day of the Western Empire. He carries under his arm a stack of reports that no one will read, orders that no one will follow, tax assessments for territories that no longer acknowledge Roman authority. He has been walking these roads for 30 years, serving an empire that has been dying for longer than he has been alive, though the dying has been so gradual, so bureaucratic, so thoroughly wrapped in the routines of normalcy that it has been easy to pretend that morning's crisis is just another temporary setback in the eternal story of Roman resilience. The fountains in the Forum Romanum still run, though the aqueducts that feed them are maintained by local contractors rather than imperial engineers. The Senate still meets, though their debates concern municipal matters rather than the governance of the known world. The eagles still fly above the remaining legions, though those legions are increasingly composed of foreign mercenaries who serve for pay rather than citizens who serve for glory. Marcus pauses at the steps of the Temple of Vesta, where the sacred fire has burned continuously for over 1,000 years. The flame still dances in its bronze bowl, still casts the same shadows it has cast since the city was young and the world was small, and Rome was just another hill town with dreams of greatness. But the priestesses who tend the fire look tired, not with the fatigue of daily labor, but with the deeper weariness of those who perform sacred duties for a people who have forgotten why those duties are sacred. They maintain the rituals because the rituals have always been maintained, because someone must, because the alternative, allowing the fire to die, is too terrible to contemplate. Yet Marcus cannot shake the feeling that he is looking at an elaborate theater performance played to an empty auditorium. The forms of empire persist, but the substance has evaporated like morning mist. The laws are still written in Latin, but most of the population speaks local dialects that grow more distant from classical language with each generation. The coins still bear the emperor's image, but they are increasingly minted from metals so base that merchants weigh them rather than count them. In the provinces, governors rule territories they have never seen, collecting taxes from people they will never meet, enforcing laws written for conditions that no longer exist. Communication between Rome and its furthest outposts can take months, and by the time orders arrive, the situations they were meant to address have often resolved themselves or transformed into entirely different problems. The barbarian tribes at the frontiers are no longer the painted savages of earlier centuries. Many of their leaders have been educated in Roman schools, speak Latin fluently, understand imperial law better than some Roman senators. They do not seek to destroy the empire so much as to be included in it, to share its benefits, to participate in its governance. But the empire, grown rigid with tradition and bureaucracy, struggles to adapt to this new reality. Some of these foreign leaders are more Roman than the Romans, more committed to classical values, more concerned with honor and duty, more willing to sacrifice for the common good. They see in Rome's ideals something worth preserving, even as Romans themselves grow cynical about those ideals, tired of the sacrifices they require, more interested in immediate comfort than long-term glory. Marcus remembers his grandfather's stories of the great campaigns, the triumphs that brought entire nations under Roman rule, the sense that history itself was flowing in Rome's direction. But those stories feel like myths now, tales from a different world rather than recent history. The Rome his grandfather described, confident, expanding, irresistible, seems to have been replaced by something smaller, more defensive, more concerned with managing decline than achieving greatness. The irony is not lost on him that the empire's very success has made it vulnerable. Roman roads carry barbarian armies as efficiently as they once carried Roman legions. Roman law provides legal justification for foreign kings to claim Roman territories. Roman education produces foreign leaders who understand Roman weaknesses better than Romans do. In the streets of the city, citizens go about their daily business with the practiced indifference of people who have learned not to expect too much from their government. Bread is still distributed, though the grain comes from foreign suppliers rather than Roman provinces. Entertainment is still provided, though the games in the Colosseum are funded by private sponsors rather than imperial treasury. The city still functions, but it functions the way a grandfather's house functions after he has died. All the familiar objects in their familiar places, all the routines continuing from habit and necessity, but somehow emptied of the presence that once gave them meaning. Rome without Romans, empire without emperors, civilization running on momentum rather than purpose. As darkness falls, Marcus makes his way home through streets that are increasingly deserted after sunset. The great city that once drew ambitious young men from every corner of the known world now exports its talent to Constantinople, to Alexandria, to wherever opportunity and security can still be found. The capital of the world has become a provincial town that happens to be surrounded by magnificent ruins. In his small apartment, by the light of an oil lamp that flickers like the Vestal flame, Marcus writes his final report. Not because he has been ordered to stop, but because he has finally understood that there is no one left to read what he writes. The emperor is a child controlled by barbarian generals. The Senate is a social club for elderly aristocrats. The bureaucracy is an elaborate machine for processing documents that no longer affect reality. He sets down his stylus and looks out his window at the 7 hills that still rise in their ancient majesty, still crowned with temples and palaces that speak of power and permanence. But power has moved elsewhere, and permanence has revealed itself to be an illusion. The hills remain, but what they represented has already begun its long transformation into legend. This is how empires end in reality rather than in stories. Not with barbarian hordes storming the gates, but with bureaucrats filing their last reports to offices that have been quietly abandoned. Not with the crash of falling walls, but with the whisper of wind through buildings that no one bothers to maintain. Not with dramatic surrender, but with the slow recognition that surrender happened so gradually that no one noticed when it became complete. Rome did not fall in a day, or a year, or even a decade. It fell the way forests fall to disease, tree by tree, leaf by leaf, so slowly that each stage seems natural, inevitable, almost peaceful, until one morning you wake up and realize that what you are walking through is no longer a forest, but a memory of one, preserved in the arrangements of stones and the patterns of paths that lead nowhere anyone needs to go. The empire sleeps now in the twilight that comes before night, and in that twilight, those who remember what noon was like can almost pretend that morning might still return, that the sun that set so slowly might yet rise again, that what has been lost might someday be recovered by those who still remember its name. And so we find ourselves here, at the end of these ancient stories, in the space between sleeping and waking, where myths reveal their truest purpose, not as history lessons or moral instruction, but as mirrors held up to patterns that repeat like waves on an endless shore. The Golden King sits alone in his palace of precious metal, surrounded by wealth that cannot nourish, beauty that cannot love, perfection that cannot grow. Somewhere beneath the waves, the bells of Atlantis ring out hours in a city that forgot how to listen. The tower stands unfinished against an empty sky, its builders scattered like words and languages no one remembers how to speak. These are not stories about ancient peoples in distant times, but songs about the eternal present, melodies that hum through every civilization, every empire, every moment when human beings gather together and dream of creating something larger than themselves. The myths whisper their warnings, not because they predict the future, but because they remember the past, all of it, every version of the same story told by different voices in different tongues. The rise that becomes fall, the unity that becomes division, the abundance that becomes emptiness, the power that becomes isolation. But perhaps, and here we must speak very quietly, because hope is fragile and scares easily, perhaps that is not the end of the story. Perhaps the myths tell us these things not to discourage, but to prepare us, not to limit, but to liberate us from the belief that we are doomed to repeat what has been repeated so many times before. Maybe the king learns to take off his golden gloves. Maybe the tower builders remember how to speak to one another. Maybe the gods return when we remember how to ask the right questions in the right voices. Maybe empires learn how to bend without breaking, how to grow without conquering, how to last without becoming monuments to their own past glory. The stories echo in the space where you rest now, like lullabies sung by ancient voices, like wisdom wrapped in the gentle rhythms of dream and memory. They ask nothing of you except that you listen, that you remember, that you carry their warnings and their hopes forward into whatever tomorrow brings. Rest now in the knowledge that every ending is also a beginning, every fall the preparation for a different kind of rising. The myths have done their work, spoken their truths, planted their seeds in the fertile darkness where new stories grow. Let them settle into your dreams, like snow falling on quiet fields, like stars appearing one by one in a darkening sky, like the first words of songs you will remember when you wake, or perhaps forget completely, but carry in your bones like the rhythm of breathing, the beat of your heart, the eternal human melody that continues long after the last story has been told. Sleep well, dreamer. The myths are patient, they will wait. And in the morning, when the sun rises, as it always has, as it always will, you may find that the golden light looks different somehow, not harder and more precious, but softer and more generous. Light that warms rather than burns, that illuminates rather than blinds, that reminds you that every dawn is both an ending and a beginning, both an echo of yesterday and a promise of whatever comes next. The ancient stories drift away now like clouds dispersing at daybreak, but their truth remains, quiet as breath, constant as starlight, eternal as the human need to understand what it means to live and love and hope and dream in a world that is always ending, always beginning, always exactly as ancient and as new as this very moment. The myths sleep, you sleep, and in that shared silence, all the wisdom that has ever been spoken waits patiently to be remembered when it is needed most. Until then, rest, dream, and let the old stories carry you gently toward whatever dawn awaits.